Hi everybody, this is John the Other, and you're probably expecting a rant right about now, and who can blame you? The rant music is playing in the background, for God's sakes. But sadly, I have no rant for you. Instead, you're getting something even better. You're getting an announcement. First though, a little background. As a number of people already know, local men's rights activist organizations have been popping up all across Canada this summer like a bunch of hyperactive, paper-hanging madmen. Much to the discomfiture of ideological thinkers who, despite repeated claims that feminism is the radical notion that women are people, or that feminism is all about equality, these disgruntled folks do not appear ready to allow that men are actually human beings, deserving of human rights, deserving of a voice, or to whom the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 2, Fundamental Freedoms, specifically the freedom of expression, applies to. Consequently, the poster campaigns of local men's organizations in Canadian cities have dealt with an awful lot of open and flagrant attempts to silence and censor them. In Vancouver, BC, the group of which I am a part and calling ourselves Vancouver MRA, have been using a very, very unpopular poster which includes the concluding statement, "Men's rights are human rights." Now, unlike the vast and varied causes, events, and political positions presented by posters posted all over Vancouver's Commercial Drive neighborhood, our posters, which include the terrifying printed punchline, "Men's rights are human rights," keep being torn down just about as fast as we can print them and put them up. And starting last week, posters which could not easily be torn down because they had been glued to plywood construction hoardings have been repeatedly defaced by as yet unknown individuals using thick-tip black Sharpies to scrawl the words "hate speech" over top of the posters claiming men's rights are human rights, as well as individuals, maybe the same ones, using a stencil and a spray bomb to decal "men's rights are human rights" with a bright red label which reads simply, "Wrong." Men's rights are human rights, and the commentary in bright red paint, "Wrong." And it gets even stranger than that. Earlier this week, Vancouver MRA member Jack Day was replacing defaced posters with new, clean copies, and a young, indignant feminist, apparently unaware of either the Canadian Charter right of freedom of expression, or else unaware that men are human beings onto whom charter protection of civil liberties extend, began tearing down the newly replaced "Men's Rights Are Human Rights" posters, along with posters showing Stats Can domestic violence rates showing sexual parity, and a poster showing male rates of workplace death, suicide, wartime death, and the negative outcomes of children growing up fatherless. Tear them all down. Silence men claiming their human rights. That appears to be the acceptable behavior for certain people who recognize no limits of decency on their own behavior. And interestingly, it was the safety officer of the construction site who intervened, interposing himself between the poster-removing feminist and the wall on which the glued-up posters were still wet. That safety officer found himself physically assaulted by the young feminist. Being an adult and a very nice man, he did not respond with any violence of his own, but of course, the police were called. And when they arrived, the violent, attacking, poster-defacing feminist went into full-blown hysterical crying mode because she was the victim. She was threatened by the posters pointing out the Stats Canada published rates of domestic violence, which indicate overall sexual parity, and in some provinces, including BC, that men are the majority of the victims of domestic violence. They were threatened by the name of a website which aggregates mainstream reporting on men falsely accused of rape, called the False Rape Society website. They were threatened, apparently, by the concept that men's rights are human rights, and by the domain name of A Voice for Men. Men have a voice? Men are human beings with human rights? How terrifying. And all of this trouble and bother over the very simple, peaceful and constitutionally protected exercise of freedom of expression. The gluing up of posters which make the outrageous claim that men's rights are human rights. So that's the background. Repetitive for some, but necessary as context. Because here comes the announcement. Vancouver MRA, the newly formed local human rights activist group focusing on systematic legal and social discrimination against men and boys, will be, on the last weekend of September, we will be putting on the first annual West Coast Men's Rights Summit, Circus, and Sideshow. And does this glorious event have a name? It surely does. You are all invited to come this September to Vancouver for Mancouver, the first annual West Coast Men's Rights Summit, Circus, and Sideshow. Step right up, throw a ball, win a prize, human rights for men. We know you don't have any, but we're giving them away for free anyway. That is the weekend of the 29th and 30th of September in Vancouver. Bring your friends, bring your enemies, and come to Mancouver in Vancouver. I will be there. John the Other. Jack Day will be there. Girl Writes What will be there. And several other people too. Probably. More details will follow as we dream those details up. And now, we return you to your regular scheduled programming on A Voice for Men Radio.
And if you'd like to help Vancouver MRA, you can do that by clicking the donate button at vancouvermra.com or even by donating to A Voice for Men. Both of those links are down there in the low bar. And don't forget, as I promised, I'm going to try my best to be in Vancouver on September 29th and 30th for John's extravaganza, which will heretofore be known as the annual Mancouver Fest. So I hope to see a bunch of you guys there. And that's it.